We will continue to develop many more attractive products for years to come. This was said by the CEO of Fujifilm on the Fujifilm X Summit on the 20th of February 2024. And it wasn't said as a side sentence, as something that you just brush off that doesn't mean anything, but rather as the ending to an opening statement for other people to start talking about the Fujifilm X100. And because of that, I think this sentence warrants further looking into what it could actually mean. Because it doesn't just suggest that ongoing camera lines will be developed further and further, but it could mean that Fujifilm is planning to release new cameras that aren't even on anyone's radar yet. I made a video a couple of months ago where I speculated on a couple of cameras that were either rumored or confirmed to get released within the first months of 2024. Those included the X100, the X Pro 4 and the GFX100S Mark II. And as you know, the X100 has been released on exactly that X Summit in February. In the meantime, Patrick from Fuji has found out that the X Pro 4 will unfortunately not be released within 2024. And on the GFX100S Mark II, we're still waiting. So let's get into what Teiichi Goto, the CEO of Fujifilm, might hint at with this statement. Real quick, a small list of cameras that will be continued or released in the future, as I want to get into the main subject of this video, a potential entirely new camera line. So we have the XE5, the X Pro 4, the GFX50R Mark II, hopefully, the XT40, and rather obvious, but I'll still mention them, the XT6 and the XH3 and 3S maybe. So what could Fujifilm release that they do not have in their lineup yet? There seem to be three different types of cameras that Fujifilm has in their lineup and in part maintains. The classic SLR style camera body that contains the beginner model, the XT200, the advanced model, the XT30 Mark II, and the top of the line product, which is the XT5. Those have distinct camera body designs with usually the dials on top to change your shutter speed and your ISO, the viewfinder on a notch on top in the middle of the camera, and not too big a grip. Then there's the rangefinder style body, which contains the advanced model, the XE4, as well as the top of the line product, the X Pro 3. As the name suggests, these cameras are shaped like a rangefinder with no notch on top and the viewfinder towards the left of the camera. And lastly, the modern PASM dial cameras, as the name suggests, they have a PASM dial on top of the camera instead of the classic Fujifilm shutter speed and ISO dials on top. This camera group contains the advanced XS20 as well as the top of the line XH2 and 2S. Out of these 8 cameras, I think Fujifilm will continue to develop 7, with the XT200 unfortunately I think having to step aside. Other than that, Fujifilm also has the fixed lens camera series with the X100, the X70 and the XF10, from which I think only the X100 series will survive. The later products have been released in 2016 and 18 respectively, and I don't think they will be continued. So what could Fujifilm have in store for us that we aren't expecting? The latest addition to Fujifilm's current lineup has been the successful XS10 in 2020, with its successor coming out, the XS20, in 2023. So it seems to make sense for Fujifilm to expand their camera lineup so that they have 2 different levels of cameras in each of the different camera categories. The SLR, the rangefinder, the PSM and the fixed lens style cameras. This would lead me to the open spot just below the X100 for a new fixed lens camera. So would Fujifilm release an advanced fixed lens camera just below the X100, and what would that even look like? I was thinking of a lower spec version to the X100, just like Fujifilm did with the XE4 and the X Pro 3. There's a huge market for X100 users out there, and I think Fujifilm bringing out a lower spec version of the X100 would bring way more potential customers into their market. Because let's be honest here, the X100 is a superb camera, just like its predecessors, and a lot of people using them are completely in love with the handling of this camera and them just being able to bring the camera anywhere they want to. But let's not ignore the fact that this camera costs $1,600 or 1,800 euros here in Germany, which is a ridiculous amount of money to spend on a camera for most people in the world. Photography, I think, is kind of its own bubble, and that probably means that photographers may not question those prices often enough. If you look at it from the outside or as someone that wants to enter the photography market, these prices can be very daunting, especially if you think about having to spend at least 1,000 to 2,000 euros for a camera body alone that's most of the time without even getting a lens. Anyway, not to sway too far off topic, the X Pro and the XE line have their fan bases. But I will certainly argue that these fan bases aren't nearly as huge as the ones that are there for the X100 series. So what could Fujifilm change about the X100 series to bring out a low spec version that would resonate with people as much as the X106 does? I say get rid of the OVF. This seems to be a big cost factor if you compare the X Pro to the XE line. I would welcome a similar EVF to the XS20, 2.36 million dots resolution and a 0.62 magnification. In my opinion, keeping the lens of the X100 series is a must because it has great quality and its f2 aperture is great. If the aperture was to be reduced to f2.8, I think that would be too big of a compromise for a lot of people that like to shoot at nighttime. Contrary to, I think, all of Fujifilm's medium tier cameras, I would like to see weather sealing on this camera, even if it costs a bit more. I think the fact that the lens is fixed, just like on the X106, would make it easier for Fujifilm to put weather sealing on this camera. Still, you would probably need to attach a filtering on top of the lens for the camera to be fully weather sealed, just like on the X100 series. Easy choice with the sensor, just go for the 26 megapixel X-Trans4 sensor. It's a great sensor and that way there's a distinguishable difference between the X106 and this potential new camera. And the X-Trans4 sensor I think is enough for most people out there. Just like with the sensor, IBIS is something great to have on a camera, but I think for a lot of people that shoot in bright conditions most of the time, IBIS is definitely not a must. Especially if you have the f2 lens, I think people would make do without the stabilization. That way they could make the camera cheaper yet again. Other than that, I think I would keep everything the same to the X106. So, how much would a camera like this cost? If we think about the big pieces that are missing, the OVF, the IBIS and the sensor, I think a camera like this would be priced significantly lower than the X106. I think something in the ballpark of $900 to $1,000 or 1,100 euros here in Germany would be realistic. And with a camera at this price point, I think more people would be willing to enter the Fujifilm X system and see how great it is to use. And later down the line, maybe get an interchangeable lens camera as well. Anyway, with the statement they made, what camera would you like to see Fujifilm release in the future? Now, if you would like to see what the potential successor to the XE4 could look like in the future, check out this video right here.